On tonight's Cover One Buffalo podcast, powered by BetUS, we will be joined by our favorite Brett Kollmann of the Film Room and Bootleg Football. But first, our guys, Handsome Jack.
Broadcasting live to Bills Mafia Worldwide with Greg Tompsett and Aaron Quinn.
Welcome to the NFL. Doesn't matter what's happened before today. Today's a brand new day. It's a brand new season.
Your number one podcast for objective Buffalo Bills coverage. No matter where you are, we got you covered.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Tompsett, along with my partner in crime, Aaron Quinn.
Yes, sir.
Aaron, it was kind of a blessing to have to just move on and get ready for this week's show.
Yeah, I'm pretty good. You've been doing this with me a long time. I'm pretty good at moving on from terrible losses. I have a great way of compartmentalizing those feelings. But this, I didn't even have to try because we had, like I was saying to Brett offline here, I'm so structured in like what we do during the week to get ready for Wednesday. And it already feels so short, like turning around for Wednesday when you break down a loss, that I didn't even have time to go back into it. So I've still had to rely on Eric and Anthony and their breakdowns of what happened in that loss. And that stuff, after we get through the show here, I will break it down. But for those that don't know, because this is not happening live, that this is being recorded here on Tuesday night, just in case any other news breaks that we don't have coming. And also, we don't have updated and accurate injury reports as much as we would typically on the Wednesday show. So I want people to know when they do see this tomorrow, we may be without some information. I don't know. We'll see.
It's all right. I'll just pretend to know anyway. So it'll be fun.
Yeah. Duct tape and bubble gum, right?
You know, bubble gum, duct tape. It's people are just figuring it out. It's how the world works. Yeah. So yeah, I think that the news that came up today, we will talk later on in the show about Davante Adams demanding a trade, about Von Miller being suspended. Those things we will talk about later on. But first, let's jump right in. You guys know him. It's not his first time on the Cover One Network here. Creator of the Film Room, co-host of the Bootleg Football podcast, our friend and friend of the network, Brett Kollmann. Brett, how we doing?
I'm doing great. I would love it if the Texans could just play like a non-stressful game for once. Probably not going to happen this week because it's Buffalo week, but it would be nice to just like blow somebody out. That would be great.
Yeah, it has been an interesting start to the season for the Texans. Both teams are coming in here with, matching 3-1 records. Both teams have had some strong, impressive wins, also kind of got boat raced in their one loss and had to come back in another one that they probably should have won a little more handily than what they did. So we did it in different order, but we've finished the quarter pole mark in pretty similar, combinations of things. How are fans around the Texans fan base? How are they feeling about this first stretch with, probably the first season with real expectations? Last year was so much found money. It was, such a pleasant surprise. There was excitement about the young talent, but I don't think anybody expected the results that came from it. How is this season with the first, feeling of real expectations?
The record is about what people expected, but I think it's looked uglier than people also expected, right? Like you look at what the Bills did to the Jags, and Texans fans are going into that game like, oh, we're about to kill these guys, and then they just like they were hanging around, and all of a sudden you find yourself down with like 2.5 minutes to go, and you're just relying again on CJ Stroud and Nico Collins to finish it off. And so it's been a lot more of a stressful start to the season than I think a lot of Texans fans wanted, even if the record is about what they expected. Not that it's been unstressful for Bills fans. I mean, my God, talk about a brutal start to the schedule. I mean, you guys have won, but if we're just looking at the teams that you guys had to play against, obviously Baltimore is going to be there in the end. Houston's going to be in the playoffs. I think Arizona's plucky.
Yeah, sneaky.
It wasn't exactly a cakewalk for Buffalo either. So As far as I'm concerned, this is going to be part one of this matchup. It's probably going to happen again in January. So I'm just hoping that nobody gets hurt, and I'm hoping that it's competitive, and I'm hoping that we just don't get embarrassed either way.
Either way.
What happened with Baltimore or Minnesota.
Yeah, real quick, you talked about some of the stress, big stress for Bills fans early in the season, right? As the injuries, Matt Milano, Bernard, Taron Johnson, obviously that reared its head here this week. But Texans also dealing with some issues in injury and not necessarily having the full slate of players that they were expected to have in these first 4 games here. Where are things at? I don't know that I've got an accurate injury report here on Tuesday. Where have things been at heading into the week, and where do you kind of expect those to trend, and maybe for this game, how they could be impactful in this game?
It definitely could be worse. And it's nothing compared to last year. Last year, they were down 80% of their starting offensive line going into the year, right? It was rough. Like, they still were successful, but it was not easy. Laramie Tunsil got rolled up on in the second quarter, but he came back and he finished the game. Joe Mixon practiced last Friday before the game, but they decided we're going to hold him out and we're going to get him right.
Just for us, get him ready.
Yeah, they knew Buffalo. I'm trying to think. Juice Scruggs got a little bit dinged, but he should be all right.
Tank Dell?
Nico had a hammy. Tank Dell was held out of last game, but he might play. Jimmy Ward again was held out of last game. I haven't looked up his status yet.
The Jimmy Ward's probably the one I'm most interested to see where that's trending, just because of the drop off, I think, beyond Jimmy Ward there, which we'll talk about when we get on the defensive
For the
side.
limit of what information we have, all 4 of them are listed as questionable right now, but we haven't even gotten into the real part of practice yet.
I will say, though, on the Jimmy Ward thing, it kind of depends, right? Because Caden Bullock came in, who's a very different type of safety than Jimmy Ward, right? More of a rangy, like true post safety, which when you get into the third down stuff, the Texans play cover 1 at the 3rd highest rate on 3rd down in the entire NFL, about 40%. So, he is like that rangy post safety that's back there. And I think he's got a hell of a lot more range and a lot more speed than Jimmy. You could also argue that Bullock is the only reason why the Texans even won that game last week, because he ran down that long Tank Bigsby run and got him out of the 4. And then the defense forced a turnover on downs, which, basically wasted a possession for Jacksonville. So he's got a different skill set than Jimmy. If he's playing this week, if you run it right at him, it's not going to be as pretty, but I think he kind of gives you a different element back there specifically for 3rd down. So we'll see.
Greg, before I toss back to you for another question here, one just popped in, kind of piggybacking off what Greg said with where the Texans were last year, and that expectation wasn't necessarily there going into this year with the expectations, and maybe not living up to them in terms of they're getting the wins, but it's not how you guys expected it to feel, especially offensively. Is this really that first big game where you're going up against a team that's considered one of the top teams? Is this kind of the measuring stick right now for the Texans in their first kind of, hey, now the expectation's there that you're going to be good and you're playing one of the top teams in the AFC? Is this kind of the biggest circled game on their calendar here early in the year?
At least so far, for sure, right? Because this is big boy football. This is a playoff game in October. And I know Bills fans are used to that at this point because – there's been this like Mexican standoff between you guys and KC and Cincinnati for the last 5 years, but this is new territory for the Texans, right?
And the Ravens should be in that.
And the Ravens.
Right?
Yeah. I'm sure the couple Baltimore fans that listen to the show are like, whoa, hey.
Yeah.
Hey,
I don't want the heat. I got enough heat this week.
Yeah.
So, it is an absolutely huge game, but also at the same time, when I look at the first 4 weeks of this season, a lot of the Texans struggles were kind of their own fault. Like Laramie Tunsil is already halfway to breaking the all-time single season penalty record, and we're 4 weeks in. This is a highly penalized team, especially with offensive penalties.
Over 11 every game so far, I think I saw.
They might be one of the only teams to do that. Baltimore, I think, had done it the first 3. I don't know if they did it last week. But
I remember during the game, I saw a graphic popped up that said 4th consecutive game with 11 plus, and I know Tunsil has 12 of his own. It's just a crazy
12.
Combination.
The record is Brandon Browner at 23 for an entire season.
Okay,
so he's on his way.
That's not the record you want to break.
So, it's been a lot of mistakes. It's been sloppy play. They are kind of playing a bit different offensive style this year under Slowick. I mean, a lot of the concepts are the same, but in terms of personnel usage, like they were a heavy 21 personnel team last year with Andrew Beck. They barely called 21 at all this year. So like, just as an example to give it context versus the Ravens game, the Texans run 11 personnel at like literally double the rate of Baltimore, right? So they run a lot of outside zone stuff that gave Buffalo problems last week, but they do it from different personnel groupings, so it's not as big and weighty. So it might be a little bit easier for Buffalo to handle with their personnel they have on the field. It's just a very different matchup than A, you faced last week, but also B, than what Houston was presenting last year, where they were another one of those big kind of weighty, grinded out 21 personnel teams. So it's a different style. It's sort of worked, and I'm fascinated to see how it matches up here.
So has D'Amico talked about the penalties? And I guess I don't remember, were penalties an issue last year?
Not nearly to this degree.
Doesn't seem like a trait of a team coached by him.
Yeah, like it's just it's odd.
Yeah,
it is odd. I kind of feel like the team, particularly the offensive line, and this, when I was at O-line Masterminds down in Dallas over summer, this was a huge topic of conversation with all the offensive linemen that were there, and they're like, we keep getting inconsistent calls, right? Because certain crews, in terms of where you're lined up, are treating it differently than others, and some care about that, lifting the back foot, and some don't. And they're like, we don't know what to do. And Laramie in particular, he has a very similar play style to Lane Johnson. Lane's been getting away with it forever. Laramie, for whatever reason, is getting called 4 times a game on that. And he's like, I'm doing the same thing I've always done, and now you're just calling it. So they're very frustrated. Every offensive lineman across the league is frustrated. I mean, Juwan Taylor, that poor guy. But like, that's part of it. But also at the same time, we're a month into the season. Like, make adjustments. Like, just 6 inches up there,
Yeah, at some point you have to figure it out. Like, hey, these are the new rules. We may not like them, but they are what they are.
Yeah, that's a conversation we could have a whole nother podcast though on, like the consistency and like how do they not in a $1 billion business get this better for the players. So that's a frustrating topic. Let's dig in here to this Texans defense versus the Bills offense in this matchup here. This one's a tough one for me to get into because sometimes I can like easily pinpoint how to attack a team, and I'm licking my chops, and I actually really like this Texans defense, man. I like what they're able to do in terms of getting pressure, and they don't do anything complicated, right? They're just kind of lining up, and you almost know what they're going to do, and they're just going to trust that they can keep it in front of them and beat you more plays than not. And it's a little bit similar to the Bills, although Bills run a little more disguised looks. But one question I have, sort of a big picture with this defense, is obviously Josh Allen's a different dude to handle. And his splits are still good, whether he's under pressure or not. But they definitely, like all QBs, except for CJ Stroud and Patrick Mahomes, the stats dip under pressure. You want to heat him up in some different ways, but it's a unique way. And you guys are getting a good amount of pressure, 14 sacks, good for fourth adjusted sack percentage. Is it going to be just line up and rush with 4 and hope to get some pressure and continue that sack rate and that pressure rate? Or are you going to have to do some different tricks to really get at Josh, like we saw with the Ravens here this last week?
It's interesting. They're very simplistic defense, and they do that so they can play fast, right? And they do that so they can avoid mental mistakes. As far as pass rush goes, I was looking at it earlier this afternoon. They're 24th in blitz rate, and they're 27th in stunt rate. So it's basically we are
rush
lining up and just pressing the pocket, right? There's a big reason why they got rid of Jonathan Grenard. Like, he kind of freelanced a little bit, and D'Amico absolutely hated that. Like, he's a very talented guy, but D'Amico's like, bring me Danielle Hunter, who's good.
1 of 11. Do your 1 of 11.
Do your 1 of 11, right? So they're a defense that compresses the pocket and tries to reduce space and make the quarterback panic and reduce space. Here's the issue, though. Josh doesn't panic. Like, the
pocket's like 1 yard out of the sideline still for Josh Allen.
It's wild how cool under pressure he is. I think he's like Drew Brees with 6 extra inches of height, just where like it doesn't matter if there's a bar fight going on, within a yard of him. Like, he's just going to stand in there. So the pocket compression stuff works on most quarterbacks. He's not one of the ones that it's terribly effective against, at least not compared to 80% of quarterbacks out there that crap themselves when the tackle gets pushed into their lap. So the big thing is you still have to do it, because as dangerous as he is in a muddy pocket, he's even more dangerous when he's out in space. So it's going to be on Danielle Hunter to make sure that, he can't do the Josh Allen thing and kind of roll out to his right and make some crazy, ridiculous throw deep down the field to Shakir. So they're going to have to keep him in there and then just hope that the coverage does a lot of the work on the back end. And like I said, it's going to be a lot of man looks on third down. I'm very curious to see if they spy Josh. I mean, they can do it with toe. Like, he's a good enough athlete for it.
I agree with that.
So much bigger that, like, they don't necessarily have like a 1-for-1 athletic match with Josh if they're trying to do the spy thing. So in the third
do you
down
think that will? I know that man stat. I saw that man stat too. Is Josh the kind of opponent where you switch up that tendency, where we've seen what he can do to man in those types of situations, or do you stay with your fastball?
I think they try it just to see, and you test it out for a quarter, right? Because if the defensive line isn't getting there and they're running all the normal, like, okay, we're just going to run high crosses, like all day long, or hey, Keon's 1-on-1, let's just throw back shoulder. Because they're so good against man coverage. So they might try it in the first quarter just to see if it holds up. And if it doesn't, okay, fine.
I mean, that segues actually really nicely into kind of where I wanted to go next with this anyway, which is in attacking and trying to build what I would do to attack the Texans defense. It definitely wouldn't be hitting Kollmann on the back shoulder. I don't want to test Stingley Jr. I don't want to test the outside, right? I love what you guys have done in the quarterback room and really in the safety room as well. I like your DBs, and I actually really like the linebackers and the way they play. But to me, the little bit I am licking my chops is getting those linebackers to come forward, attack the run game, and hitting them quick with Dalton Kincaid, Khalil Shakir right behind him. Is that are you seeing the same type of weakness in the Texans defense, or am I totally off on where to attack them?
Particularly in early downs, right? Because we mentioned how it's a man-heavy defense on third down. Well, on early downs, they're pretty high up there in terms of cover 3 usage. They're like 10, top 12 in terms of cover 3 on early downs. And they do mix quarters in there. Again, it kind of depends on receiver distributions and personnel, et cetera, if they're in 3 versus quarters. But there is opportunities here where I think it can just be like RPO central on early downs. And he's just looking at it pre-snap and he's like, there's my guy. And we're just using all these quick little throws as an extension of the run game. Again, I think the Texans would be happy with trying to make them make every possession 11 to 12 plays. But there's a few quarterbacks in the league that I think can do that. And Josh is one of them. So again, this is one of those strength on strength matchups where we know what the Texans are going to do. We know what the Bills are going to do. They're both really good at what they do. They happen to just smash into each other. I truly don't know who's going to win out. That's what's interesting about it.
Yeah, that's the fun thing about football, man, and the week-to-week matchups. And then last one here before I pass you over to Greg, not even really so much about this particular matchup, but I have a real interest in what the career arc of Jalen Petrie has been. Loved him as a prospect, love kind of the move to slot. How's that going? And if there is some issue with Jimmy Ward, is that something that he's has that maybe ability to be more of the hybrid that we're seeing with your Budda Bakers and maybe not Kyle Hamilton and the freak athlete he is, but that type of style we're seeing more across the league and being a hybrid player to move around like that?
It's funny, when he was coming out, I distinctly remember saying there is no more Bills-ish DB in this class than Jalen Petrie, right? Because it's is he a safety? Is he a nickel?
We like that.
And he's really, really good at it. Early on, his early time in Houston, he missed a lot of tackles, and that was frustrating. But he was there, he was in position,
always around the ball.
And, once he kind of cleaned that up, now he's becoming kind of like their own version of a Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, Teron Johnson, throw them all into a pot and mix them together, where he could play either of those spots. Obviously, he's in nickel now because he is their best nickel. But if they needed him to play safety, he could play safety if they wanted him to. It's just they like him at nickel because he's closer to the ball and he's an impact player against the run and as a blitzer and everything like that. So, he's just their little ball of butcher knives they got out there.
So as we flip over to the offensive side of the ball, obviously everybody wants me to talk about the receiver here, and that's what I want to do. How did Nico Collins become the best receiver in the NFL? I don't understand. Honestly, the other guy in the news today, it's almost like the Davante Adams arc, where like the first couple years there were some flashes and some moments where you're like, hey, there might be a little something more here. Then the third year, it was kind of like, oh, hey, he's going to be a guy. And then in the fourth year, it's like, no, he's the guy. Like it's unbelievable to see him use the physicality in the way of, honestly, Texans great, like Andre Johnson, like that kind of physicality where it's like, no, he's bigger than everybody, he's faster than everybody. It's wild to see him come into his own, and the fact that he was kind of a inconsistent, ended up, I mean, day 3 pick, right? His 4th round.
I think it was
Go Blue.
Was it late 3rd or early 4th?
Yeah, I think it was 3rd, because remember, he was one of those guys who I'm pretty sure didn't play in the COVID year.
Yeah, he was the 89th pick.
80, okay. Yes, and was it Amon-Ra was right after him, or right, like the two of them were together, and there's a whole bunch of guys who got picked before them that everybody regrets
because nobody knows anything. That's the prime example.
But just talk through. I mean, obviously, all the work that you do here. This is not your typical developmental curve to see like solid, huge breakout in the 3rd and 4th year. We just haven't seen that in a while. It used to be the way it always used to work. 15 years ago, 3rd year breakout was the thing for receivers. But it's interesting to see a guy come into his own to this degree.
The big thing, and we always knew that was there with Nico, because if you watched him in the first couple of years, he was in a really, really bad situation as far as who was calling the plays and who was throwing the ball. But he was open. Like, it was there. The talent was there. Like, he did a lot of cardio every Sunday, but like you could envision a scenario where if the quarterback situation improved and the play caller improved, like he could pop off. And then they got Stroud and they got Slowick, and he became the dude. It was always there, but I really do think that his relationship with Stroud and his relationship with Slowick is kind of what allowed that to flourish, right? I think there's a bunch of receivers around the league that could have been this if they were as blessed as Nico was to have those things come into his life, 3 or 4 years into it. But I think of all the receivers around the league that just never got that opportunity, right? That never got that chance to play with a quarterback this good and with an OC that's this good. I mean, God, just think of Stefon. Like, how different would Stefon be seen if he didn't go to Buffalo?
Well, you see like the Allen Robinson, timeline, or now what we're finally seeing, Terry McLaurin finally having somebody who can get him the ball.
A great example.
Some of those guys don't get that moment, and having him, come into this is just phenomenal. He's incredible to watch each week, and obviously I'm very conscious of the Texans, so I've watched the majority of all of their games, and then rewatched a couple today as we're going through there. And I know some people have kind of talked as though, okay, there was now the, full book of film out on CJ. He's going to have to adjust. And now he's, maybe not quite as fantastic as he was last year. And I look, and it's 67.6% completion percentage, 263 yards a game, 6 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, still almost 100 quarterback rating. Like, this is a heck of a sophomore slump that he's struggling his way through. And like you said, yes, maybe it hasn't looked as easy as some of it did last year, but in the moments when it matters, he's still coming up ridiculously clutch and coming through for them. And I think that's really where a lot of guys separate themselves in being special, and that, yes, maybe he's going to have to now pivot, and that, yes, people see some of the things that they need to throw, but honestly, probably more at Slowick that they've gotten more film on to be able to adjust and have counters to and adjustments to. But man, he's still awful special.
The big thing is, I mentioned that relationship between Stroud and Nico. They have such incredible trust in each other, and I don't want to compare it to Mahomes and Kelsey because that is like a historically ridiculous clutch pairing. But in several moments throughout this season already, when the Texans absolutely need a play, there is nobody that Stroud is going to throw to other than Nico because he knows Nico is going to catch the ball, and Nico knows that Stroud is going to put that ball in an absolutely ludicrous spot that very few other quarterbacks can do. And there is no defense for a perfect throw and a great catch. There's literally nothing you can do, even when the defense knows the ball is going to Nico and they're doubling him. You know, we got a corner with outside leverage. We got a safety with inside leverage. Cool. We got a bracket, and it just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. So there's very few fan bases that I think get to have that kind of confidence in those late fourth quarter moments. As a Texans fan, it still feels weird to me that we get to be one of them. As I'm sure Bills fans also went through that. You know, the first few years after Josh popped off, we're like, is this real? Like, can I trust this? And then,
do we have the guy?
You know, now you guys almost expect it, right?
Yeah.
But
now it actually becomes, now it's the exception when he doesn't come through with the miraculous, amazing play. It feels weird that way. One last piece before we get, I have one quick one on the offensive line. I think that I didn't expect Mixon to have what he had left in that first game, and that, really, I mean, he carried the load in that initial game, and then you lose him early in the second game. And I think a lot of people, myself included, saw like, wow, it's Slowick, it's Stroud. They still got this offensive line. Akers will probably come in and look great, or Pierce, or whoever, Ogunbowale, and they'll be just fine. And it hasn't been the same degree of production in the run game. So I'm curious, is that going to make Mixon maybe a bigger factor in this season than maybe what people expected? Or was that more just, hey, that was the first game, but it wasn't, maybe as fantastic as it seemed from the outside?
So the thing with the Texans run game, and this is kind of what fascinates me about Mixon's arc, they run the third most outside zone in the entire NFL, about 59%, which is a wild number, an absolutely ridiculous number for outside zone. And the fact that the Falcons are number one at 67% is like, what?
That's a crazy number.
That's a crazy number. But the Texans run a lot of outside zone, and there's an old saying of the point of attack for outside zone or wide zone or stretch, whatever you want to call it. The point of attack on that play is everywhere because it can hit. I mean, you're literally reading it down the line. Okay, we're reading the outside hip of the ghost tight end. We move to the tackle, move to the guard, move to the center, move to the backside, and it's just wherever it is, you got to pick your spots and go. And I don't want to say it requires, but it does help to have a veteran back that has read that concept literally thousands of times at this point and has a great understanding for the pace of the play, has a great understanding for how certain fronts are going to fit it, just looking at it pre-snap and kind of understanding, okay, unless I get a weird kind of funky stunt, here's where I think all these bodies are going to line up. And so I know exactly how far I can press it, what step, how I can pace it out. And he runs that concept incredibly well. And I think we saw that a little bit last week with Derrick Henry too, who, this is a Buffalo defense that allowed, I think it was 1.3 yards per carry in outside zone the first 3 weeks, and it was 9.4 against Baltimore because Derrick just knows how to run that concept. And so I think when you're looking at a Bills defense that operates the vast majority of the time in at least a too high look pre-snap, post-snap, it's not always too high, but even when they roll into their one high stuff, the safeties are still starting deep. So they still have to come from depth. There's still a lot of space there. And when there's a lot of space, that means you have to be correct on your angles. For a long time, they could rely on Micah and Poyer to take the correct angle and to make the tackles. We look at what happened with Baltimore. They abused those DBs. Like they got Benford. They got, poor DeMar Hamlin. He got wrecked on a couple of those. And so I think when you're looking at a secondary that is not as good at tackling, specifically the safeties, as in past years, because they're not as veteran. I think they missed like 8 or 9 tackles last week against Baltimore. Going against a veteran back that understands how to manipulate those blocks, how to make these safeties take bad angles. And, oh, by the way, he's 230.
Yeah.
It's kind of a rough matchup in that regard, even though on paper Buffalo has been good against this concept. There's certain personnel factors at play here that could very easily make them not good against this concept. So I'm fascinated to see how it works out. Again, Mixon did practice last week. He didn't play last week. I think they were saving him for this game because they probably know in their heart of hearts that if they're going to win it, it's going to have to be similar to the Texans Colts game where it was Mixon getting like 30 carries and just running all over them.
I don't want to see that at all.
That is the recipe to be up on Sean
that is
McVay's
100%
team.
the recipe.
Yeah.
I expect that fully.
Yeah.
So speaking of which, let's put you on the spot. You know how we do it. Our friends over here at BetUS, they have the game. I think I saw it start out early as maybe Texans -1. Now I've seen it all the way to Bills -1. Depending on which book you look at, I've seen it back and forth. For anybody watching here, if you want to be able to get some action in on it, use promo code YouTube150. They will match your first deposit up to 150% at up to $2,000, and your second and third deposits at 125%. Fantastic payouts, easy to use format. Go over and check out everything they have going on over at BetUS. Brett, what do you expect to see this Sunday at 1:00?
This is one of the hardest games to pick of the entire season because it is so evenly matched, which it should be. These are probably two of the four best teams in the conference, right? I think quarterback, we know Josh is a Hall of Famer. He's probably going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. I think quarterback is a wash. I really do think that Stroud is that special. I think receiving core favors Houston. I think tight end favors Buffalo. I think running back, if Mixon plays, is a wash. I think offensive line, assuming Laramie Tunsil's ankle is okay, is also a wash. So that's pretty even offensively. Defensively, as well coached as these guys are, and God bless them, they've made it work through all the injuries. I do think that defensively on the back end, the Texans have an advantage personnel wise, even if you know the pass rush part of it, I think is fairly even. So the slightest of slight margins I give to the Texans just based on that, and it's solely because I think that when it comes down to it, that young, inexperienced Bills secondary is gonna have to rally and tackle. And I'm really worried about their ability to do that right now because they had to rally and tackle against Baltimore and just couldn't do it. So
it's guys like Mixon and Nico, like that's guys you cannot miss on because if you miss, that's a head of steam that's hard to stop.
And like I understand like the Diggs revenge game or whatever is like a narrative for that. Not really. Like he's the number 2 receiver. And he's comfortable in that role. Like he's not really making noise in Houston. He hasn't really amped up this game as like a revenge game. And
him and Josh have both said the right things. They've both said nice things.
Yeah.
They'll go shake hands before the game. It's not going to be like, there's not the animosity fans want there to be.
Yeah, it's not a Stefon Diggs revenge game. It's honestly a Damar Hamlin versus Joe Mixon game. Like that's what it is. So I favor the Texans very slightly. I think it's it's probably just whichever kicker makes the most field goals, and in that regard, okay, yeah, I'll trust Kaimi
Fairbairn right now. I'd take him over Tyler Bass. Unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let the guys know what you guys coming up next on Bootleg.
So we just released an episode today, kind of talking about quarterback situations, right, and the importance of situation for the success of a quarterback, and how there's really only like 3 situation-proof quarterbacks in the NFL.
Mason Rudolph. No, it wasn't where you're going. Sorry,
but Mahomes, Allen. Maybe just Mahomes and Allen as far as like situation proof, right? In terms of, can make it work regardless of protection and receiving core, et cetera, et cetera.
I feel like CJ's there almost like he's right there.
Maybe, but we haven't seen him without Slowick and Nico and, Laramie Tunsil.
Sure.
Like we haven't seen him without it. I think it probably, but again, it's like 20
Well, all the questions that people ask of like, hey, what would have happened if Bryce went to that situation and CJ went to Carolina? How would that have turned out? The same questions people ask of like, hey, would Josh be Josh if he went to Hugh Jackson in Cleveland? And it's hard to know.
Would Josh be Josh if he didn't have an amazing defense to bail him out early in his career when he was making those crucial mistakes, but it didn't cost them games, right? Would Josh be Josh if they didn't make the move to get Stefon? And it benefited Stefon too. Like people forget, like Stefon was seen as like the 1B, potentially number 2 in Minnesota, gets to Buffalo and then becomes like a consensus top 4 to 5 receiver in the NFL. So it benefited Stefon. It also benefited Josh. You never really know how these things would have played out. But, the episode was all about quarterback situations and how the vast majority of quarterbacks in the NFL are made or in several cases broken by their situation. And then, of course, talking about the rookies this year, how, the Jaden Daniels situation is vastly superior to the Bo Nix situation. And we're seeing that play out.
Yeah. Or the Caleb Williams situation.
It's odd, too, because everybody talked about how, this is the best situation that any number 1 overall pick has ever been to. And it's like, yeah, we get it.
Because the fantasy football positions
Correct.
looked awesome and
The
nobody
offensive
looked at
line.
the 5 guys standing in front of him.
Guys, Nate
Or the
Davis
coordinator.
is starting guard for this team. Like, what are we doing?
Oh.
Not great.
I honestly feel bad. Aaron's brother is a Bears fan. Like it's painful to watch just to see someone scramble for their life
just get hit a
every
lot.
snap. It's
He has
so
to get it
painful.
out in literally 2.3 seconds or he dies.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yes.
Bad
I have a
news.
bunch of Patriots friends that want to see Drake May. And I'm like, do you see
Don't
what they
do
do
it.
to Jacoby Brissett?
Don't
Do
do
you
it to
want that to happen?
When they put him
Don't do
in
it.
that TNF game and like literally the second snap he got folded in half, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't
Don't
watch
do
it.
it.
It's too nuts.
Yeah. Tell Jacoby that's what the money's for.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
what the
Ice
money's
out,
for.
Patriot
out
legend
stuff.
Davante Adams is gonna help them out.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right. Anything else for the folks before we let you go?
I do have one question for you guys. Can Buffalo trade for Davante? Is that possible?
We got to say,
so
actually, that's a great segue.
I'm gonna go into it here. The as is no. There's genuinely no scenario where they can take it as is. However, you could tell me a story like Leonard Williams last year where rumor is the Giants had similar offers and then all of a sudden the Seahawks said, hey, we'll give you these picks if you eat a bunch of the money. And all of a sudden they did that deal with Seattle
these picks.
and did that. We have a bunch of these picks, and obviously, like I think sometimes it does get talked up that like teams don't want to trade to so and so. I don't think the Raiders have any interest in giving their best player to the Chiefs. So if it comes out to where, hey, the Jets and the Bills are offering the same thing, but the Jets can eat the money, they'll just can take the money as is, which they're in slightly better position than us, but not perfect either. They might just do that. But if the Bills say, hey, we'll give you more, they're getting a third from the Jets, and the Bills say, we'll give you a second and a fourth if you eat the money and give them to us at a $1.2 million salary. That scenario could happen, but it would have to. That's the only one. That's the only way to thread that
the
needle.
Jets
Is
get Adams,
the Raiders need to eat the money?
Can we steal Reddick?
Honestly, I saw Brett Spielberger put it out there like, hey, I'm just putting it out there. Hassan Reddick and Davante Adams have roughly the same salary.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, that'll be the key to the Raiders' success is spending $100 million a year on their defensive line.
On another, like when you just had a top 8 draft pick to put opposite Max Crosby and bought yourself a $28 million defensive tackle. Go get another $100 million.
And they still won't be able to sack Patrick Mahomes. They'll still find a way to get the ball out.
Or beat Joe Alt. So.
Yeah. Oh, man.
All right, Brad. Appreciate it, man. It's always awesome to have you on. It's always a ton of fun. We'll go through and finish out some sponsored stuff here and talk to you soon.
Thanks, boys.
Appreciate
No
it.
injuries.
Awesome.
No injuries.
Yeah,
That's
healthy. 1 of 2. Game 1
Yes.
of 2. We'll do round 2 later on.
Yeah.
All right, later, man. Always fun to have Brett on. It's awesome to be able to.
I know.
to
I could
go
have
through
asked
and see
him
all his
more
success.
questions all day. I wanted to ask him a little bit about like both teams have defensive coaches. What's his thought on that? What's the Texans? Could talk football with Brett all day.
Yeah, and they're both teams are in a similar boat where there have been moments where their OC was immediately going to be the guy who was about to get snagged for a head coach. And then all of a sudden, so also there's games where, kind of the petals off the flower, and all of a sudden be like, I don't know, maybe we don't want him here. And it's funny how that works all the time.
Yep.
So obviously, as Brett brought up here, a lot of fans saw the news on Tuesday where the Raiders put it out there that they are listening to trade offers for Davante Adams. His hamstring hurt, and he missed this last game. I have a feeling his hamstring will feel a lot healthier at his next team. So our Here to Help segment is just kind of talking about the salary cap and the position they're in. The Bills came up a lot. A lot of national folks, Field Yates, Albert Breer, a lot of national folks, the team they went to was the Bills, was who should trade for Davante Adams. We're always used as the stalking horse in many of these situations.
I think there's an aggressive part of Brandon Beane that is like where there's smoke, there's fire. I think he is making calls and doing those things.
He likes to do those things, and it's not crazy. Like we do, like everybody eats is a fun idea, but it doesn't mean they don't want a really talented guy. They're not purposely avoiding talent. They just, hey, we think we can make it work with this group of well-rounded guys who all are okay playing a role and not demanding targets. Like, that's good. But guys who demand targets, Justin Jefferson demands targets. I'd like to have him.
Yeah.
I'd be Jamar Chase demands targets. I'd like to have him. Yeah. Like, there's guys who, when you're that good, it's okay to demand targets. Davante Adams is one of those guys. Now, he's also 31. I think he turns 32 this season, or he's about to turn 32. He's making a ton of money. His salary is over $16 million. There is no scenario where we can make that fit. There are the amount of restructures and releases and renegotiations and extensions. We do not have enough levers to pull and switches to flip. We broke them off. Like, we don't have it. The only scenario is the one I mentioned to Brett, where if we want to pay the Raiders in draft compensation to eat the salary before they trade him, and to trade him, and the other name that's come up is with the Browns, they already redid Amari Cooper's contract. They paid him the $20 million he was owed this year in a signing bonus. His salary is now $1.21 million. The Bills can trade for any player that gets paid $1.2 million. That's totally fine. We get anybody that makes $1.2 million, we could trade for that. So it's up to both teams in that scenario, because God forbid someone would ever go to front office and say, Deshaun Watson sucks, I don't want to play with him anymore. No one would ever say that. But in theory, if someone like Amari Cooper were to come to such a decision and say, hey, I'm a free agent next year, I just want you guys to know I don't want to play with that guy anymore, so I'm going to leave. If you want to get something for me, go ahead. I'm open to trading for any cheap player that we can bring in and add talent to the team. I don't think it's as critical of a need as what people seem to think. I want the defensive guys back, but I don't hate the idea of bumping Valdez-Scantling out of the rotation and kind of knocking everybody down a notch and inserting somebody at the top and taking some pressure off of everybody else to be able to have someone who tilts a little gravity there. I'd want to have a lot of conversations with either Cooper or Davante beforehand of, hey, this is not going to be 160 targets, but you might come in and be number one. Like, we'll get you, on pace for whatever 100, 120 would be. But it's not going to be like, hey, you're getting double digit targets every game. Like, we do have a lot of weapons here. But I won't hate it. If they figure out a way to do it, I'll be excited. I'll celebrate like everybody else and go, pound my chest. Oh my God, we got Davante Adams. Yeah. But I'll be pretty surprised. The needle that has to be thread of nobody else offers the same compensation without asking the Raiders to eat that money. 2, asking historically relatively cheap Mark Davis to eat money is not always the most likely scenario. And 3, that Brandon Beane's willing to give up that much draft compensation to take on a 32-year-old receiver, which, by the way, is due $72 million the next 2 years, $36 million a year. Now, luckily, that's almost so high that they can go to his agent and be like, listen, no one's going to pay that. So the best we can do is tell you that right now we'll make him a free agent. He'll be able to go out and get the best money he can get. and we'll give him a season with Josh Allen where he's playing with one of the best quarterbacks in the world to maximize his value and go get one last contract. But no one's going to give him that $36 million. So throw that out the window now. It would almost be worse if it was like 2 years, $40 million, where there probably are some teams who would give him $20 million a year and keep that on, and the Bills might be able to do that, might not. It's almost so high that it kind of helps them a little bit, that it's so ridiculous and no one's going to get that. But all those things, they would have to check every single one of those boxes. The Raiders paying the money, the two teams coming together on the draft compensation, Davante being cool with it and knowing he's not getting that money next year and probably not getting a new deal when he shows up. And that's just a lot of boxes to check. I'm not sure Davante is going to be the one that's here to help with our friends William Mattar Law Offices.
Yeah, no, I don't think the math is mathing well for Davante. Like you said, so many needles have to be thread. The probability of getting a deal done like that is not great for the Bills. But I'm going to focus on the fact that they're in those names of consideration. I don't think it's just people connecting dots to the need of the Buffalo Bills or the perceived need of a wide receiver one. I think the Bills are always in on these conversations. And this was my reply to Jeremy White, because I think he was trying to use this as a kind of a slam dunk of like, oh, it's October and we're already talking about how we needed a wide receiver one this whole time. I was right the whole time. And I don't think anyone ever advocated against having better talent at the wide receiver position. Like no one's ever come on any airwave and made that argument. I think you made it pretty clear that you can get by with this. And I don't even think the Bills anticipated going into the season without Stefon Diggs, right? Like they also still wanted to have that talent on the roster. It didn't work out. But that kind of bakes into this too, is there's a payment for Diggs like still on the book. So there's a lot of assets being tied up in that already, making a move for that. To your point, I think it's looking at other names of guys that could want to shake free from the spots they're in that are free agents, because he's not the only one that's going to start getting frustrated here this season.
In Denver.
Sure.
I almost wish
Could
that
T. Higgins be one?
I
mean, we have Nico Collins now, and that's not...
I doubt Cincinnati would want to move him to us, and he probably would want some assurance prior to going to a new place. But yeah, in theory, someone had brought up Chris Olave, just that he's not getting the ball as much in New Orleans. I think they'd want a really premium draft pick. They'd want a first plus for Olave. So it's more so in the range of in Amari Cooper. Honestly, if like Adam Thielen had been healthy, but Deontay Johnson in Carolina, like that's the kind of guy that you might be able to. He's going to be a free agent next year. That's much more realistic. Is that
can we get?
Is that well? But some of those teams,
they're good enough.
In my mind, those are teams that just aren't going to be honest.
I know, but the Commanders are going to win that division. Everyone knows,
so,
right?
If you want to know my pick for where Davante Adams ends up, it's the Commanders.
It's
That's my guess. Is that he goes to Washington, and they capitalize on the excitement around Jaden Daniels right now, and put him next to Terry McLaurin.
Yeah, but I think what should be highlighted is the fact that I think Brandon Beane, regardless of the position, regardless of the need, when there's an opportunity to add talent, he's going to sniff out if there's a way that he can do it in a way that makes sense for the Bills. That's good GMing. I'm glad that he's always in on those conversations. And I think regardless of where Adams goes, I feel confident knowing that our GM isn't settling no matter what the case is. Every position but quarterback, he's looking to make an improvement in no matter who's on the roster still.
Yeah, and I think that's an exciting way to approach it. And you look at how even the Rasul Douglas trade, that one was basically the combination of we gave up the earlier pick, but then we got back the later pick, and that ended up being basically Rasul Douglas and Javon Solomon. That's where we got the Javon Solomon pick. So that's another possibility. Something they could do is giving up more of a premium pick, because we do have an extra second rounder and 2 extra fourth rounders. So they'll have extra picks in that range where you could make something work. But it would have to fit in right. And again, by far the biggest is the money. Like we just don't have any extra money, and we don't have any extra levers to pull to fit. So the banana stand is tapped out. Like we have, other people have to work with their banana stand to be able to give us the player. Next year we'll get back to it. Next year we're way more normal. In the future we'll be back to having levers to pull and to figure this thing out, but just there isn't anything to work with right now. We have to have them do the work.
Yeah, and I don't think any of this conversation should be a reaction to what happened Sunday Night Football, right? Like you're trying to add because you believe if Brandon Beane's even considering an ad like this in a year like this with the way the roster is shaped and what dead money you owe, the fact that he's even making those considerations, he believes that this team could make that run. Like he's not even considering making a trade like that if he doesn't believe that it could result in this year the Bills making a legitimate Super Bowl run. Because like you talked about, there's going to be no benefit beyond this year that you're going to bank on moving assets for. So all those things I think you take as positives of what the team believes and how they're trying to improve this team. And if opportunities come up where they could get a good deal, I know Brandon Beane's going to strike on that. Real quick, before we wrap up here, we got to do our predictions, but also any salary cap stuff. I know people have talked about, can we cut Vaughn? He's only suspended for a month. Nobody's going to sit here and say anything about his personal behavior. I think we've already had those conversations on this show and how we feel about it. But in terms of football and how this affects the Bills, he's out a month. Probably not worth cutting. Like he's still playing well. He's going to be back in a month. That's kind of nonsense talk. But will you explain any ramifications that would come from that?
So it's super weird. Like the roller coaster I've been on mentally with Von Miller is wild. So super excited when we first signed him. He looked awesome, blew out his ACL. Oh no, he's not going to be the same. Starts to work his way back, has some flashes and moments, but honestly pretty disappointing. When he tries to come back, then has during the bye week has this incident, with allegations that are then recanted by the woman that he's still with today. Like they're still together now. And then the way that it's done, there was no further information. We all kind of recognized what it was. And, a lot of people are familiar with those kind of situations. They could be really muddy. There's reasons people change their story on things, sometimes good, sometimes wrong, sometimes bad. Like none of us know the truth of what's there, but it doesn't sound great no matter what. So I respect anybody who has moral feelings about Von Miller. I had also kind of resigned myself to the fact of, listen, he's just an albatross of a contract that we can't get out of, and he's going to be on the roster, and he's just going to be a guy that's a statue that stands over there and is part of my life, and he won't be part of my life in 2025, but I got to deal with it this year. Then in camp and preseason, we start to see some things like, oh, well, that looks a little bit different. Yeah. And then he has a sack in each of the first 3 games. And then this story comes out, and like I just had kind of the fact that in Texas they said they weren't pursuing it any further and no charges were going to be filed. I'd kind of mentally moved on from it. Like I didn't excuse it or dismiss it or say that he shouldn't be held accountable for whatever happened there. I just had kind of moved past it mentally. So now to have this come back, it does give the Bills the option to void any guarantees, but the issue is his guarantees were in 2022, 2023, and 2024. Well, in 2024, we already restructured and renegotiated his contract. He gave that pay cut because, in reality, both he and the Bills probably knew this was a possibility that was coming or was coming either way. And so he gave back some of that money in the form of incentives, which also means he reduced the salary. Like his salary is like $1.6 million. So the amount of guaranteed money we could get out of, it's $1.1 million. Now, if we wanted to release him today, we couldn't let it play out. Right now, it's less likely he gets the incentives because he's missing 4 games. It would void any further guarantees, but there's no more guarantees after this year. Any of the other dead cap, some smart people on Twitter asked me about the dead cap hit. That's from cans we kicked down the road for cash we already paid him. Yep. Not guaranteed money we still owe him. If we were to release him, the money we'd have left over is for cash we already paid him but haven't accounted for on the salary cap. So there's nothing to gain. The only scenario is if we release him today, right now, this week, we could go back after the original $21.6 million signing bonus, and it was a 6-year deal. We could go back after half of that for 3 of the years. So, but the NFLPA would take us to court because they would say, hey, you renegotiated in the spring of 2024 in full knowledge of this. So we would release him today for basically a 50-50 shot that after a couple years of court, we might get credited back $10 million in 2026.
Doesn't make sense.
I don't expect that to be the case. So anyone who has a strong moral feeling that, hey, we should cut this guy already, I would honestly probably question, like, didn't you feel the same way? Like, were you cheering for him when he got sacks in the first 3 games? Because everybody had kind of, compartmentalized that, not accepted it, not excused it, but compartmentalized that and moved on. This isn't new information. This is simply him being penalized for what we already knew about.
Yeah.
It's a messy, icky situation. We hear it in music and movies all around our life. It is what it is. I don't expect that to be the case, but in theory, the Bills could pursue that. That is their option.
Yep. Yeah.
Now for our prediction. What is I'll bring it up one more time. Our friends at BetUS, you can use YouTube 150, get a 150% match up to $2,000, 125% on your second and third deposit. What is your score prediction?
Yeah. I'm not going to drag on because I'm not ever actually right about this anyway, but I am going to go with the under, I think, on the total. What they have, 47.5. I think I'm at like 46.5. So I have it 27-19. I just think that this one, I don't think the Bills are going to get punched in the mouth twice, even if the Texans want to do some of the same things the Ravens do. I think they're Bills are too good of a team to allow that to happen. They know they want to put that taste out of their mouth. Two, I think that this is a much better matchup just schematically for the Bills than
their strengths on the outside. We're stronger on the defense outside.
Yes, and I think we'll be able to put together some nice scoring drives. I think they're going to struggle to capitalize on scoring drives and settle for a lot of field goals. And I think that we outpace them with touchdowns. And in the end, they just can't put enough touchdowns together. And we win 27-19. And things are feeling pretty good again.
I'm in the same space. I also have the under. I have it 24-20.
Okay.
I think the Bills do get a win here. I think they get back together. I don't think it's perfect. I think there might be some annoying Joe Mixon moments. He is a hard runner. He's given us a hard time before in Cincinnati. They certainly watched what Derrick Henry did. They can't do the exact same things. They don't have the tight end talent that Baltimore has to keep us off guard that way. Also, Bobby Babich and Sean McDermott now have a week to put some different thoughts and ideas together here. So I think they're going to be able to turn that around.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Anything else for the people here before we get them out?
No, man, that's it. It's obviously this is going to come out Wednesday, so enjoy. And I'm bummed that we didn't get the chats. There's a bunch of names. This is not it's weird for us not going live. So maybe I'll head into the chat here tomorrow and see when it's going live.
Maybe we'll be talking with you guys as you're watching it.
Chat some people, but other than that, man, it's good to bounce back from that Baltimore, get into this game and do this show because I need it. I need to get over that one quick.
Yeah, I was very thankful to have that purged from my memory quickly, moved on to this game. And again, it doesn't slow down anytime soon. We get the Jets right after this. This is what Brett talked about, the welcome to a first place schedule. There are no easy games. We got tough games the whole way. But it also gets you geared up for the playoffs and gets you ready for that kind of situation. Make sure you're checking out all the other great work. Eric did an awesome breakdown, talking about the humbling situation with that game and how we got in that spot. Also some glimmers of hope from Dorian Williams and from some others that maybe had a little bit better performance than people realized. Make sure you're checking out all the guys at Air Raid Hour, Under Review, Roundup, Disguise Coverage, all the great stuff we have going on across the board at Cover One. But on behalf of fantastic producer Chris Kepner and Aaron Quinn, I am Greg Tompsett. You have been listening to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. Our friends at BetUS ask you to please gamble responsibly. And on behalf of our team here, we are out.